The 70s were a very intense and changing time all over the world. Especially young people stood up for a renewal of overcome structures and thinking. The origin of this movement were the peace protests in the US against the Vietnam War. In Germany, the peak of this movement is called the '68 Revolution.
The students did not approve the current political situation in Germany, also shaped by the Great Coalition and their actions in that time controlling 90% of the parliament. This meant the lack of a proper parliamentary opposition.
As a side effect of this widely spread dissatisfaction, the so-called APO movement was founded. The extra-parliamentary organization's goal was to form a counterpart for the parliament, criticizing and questioning their decisions. The criticism mainly contained the parliament's means to pass a new emergency law. The students feared a repetition of the past, referring to Article 48, which led to Hitler's reign.
Moreover, a lot of influential leaders from the NS time were still in several public offices, like in universities. In general, the past was mainly kept silent. The desire for reforms was omnipresent in that time, while the student questioned authorities in politics, economics, and the press.
Furthermore, the supporters of the movement strived for the liberalization of sexual behavior and attitudes concerning pornography, diverse sexual relationships, and in general alternative family structures. Generally, ideas of typical conservative morality promoted by the CDU and the SPD were questioned.
The most important time of the '68 revolution started with the Persian Shah visiting Berlin on the 2nd of June 1967. Huge protests took place all over Berlin, escalating in the shooting of Benno Ohnesorg by a policeman. This led to highly violent street fights and a great media presence. Those events had a major political impact on the following years, resulting in several political reforms.
In the following time, there were demonstrations against authorities and the Springer Publishing Company because of their major influence on the public and their monopoly-like standing in the business.
The peak of the revolution took place on the 11th of April in 1968 with the assassination attempt on the student movement's leader Rudi Dutschke by a right-wing extremist. This led to most intense fights all over Germany, the so-called Osterunruhen.
Globally, there were a lot of demonstrations for peace. In communist countries, peace movements were suppressed by military force from the Soviet Union. The so-called Prague Spring took place in 1968, representing a period of protest for the democratization and liberalization in Czechoslovakia.
In the GDR, the situation was different than in Western Germany, because the GDR was a new state without the old structures, values and people with connections to the NS time and high offices. Nevertheless, freedom symbolized by the Western culture and behavior, GDR citizens and especially the younger generation strived for, were restricted. Comparable to the Prague Spring, protests were strictly oppressed.
The election of Willy Brandt as the new chancellor of the FRG and the newly implemented coalition relaxed the tense situation in Germany.
In the 70s, a very small part of the movement radicalized itself. The RAF, a terror organization, the Rote Armee-Fraktion, was founded. They made use of means like kidnapping, blackmailing people, or destroying buildings, fighting the state violently.
They committed bomb attacks on, for example, US military bases, or the Axel Springer Publishing Company made them maybe the most wanted criminals in German history. While the RAF founders Andreas Baader, Gudrun Ensslin and the other heads of the terror organization were imprisoned, the second generation of RAF members developed, leading to kidnapping the Lufthansa plane called Landshut. They started a hostage situation in order to put pressure on the government, wanting the immediate release of their comrades. As a reaction, the imprisoned leaders committed suicide in their cells. There is a suspicion that the state occasioned the murder. This controversial night is called the Todesnacht von Stammheim.
There also was a RAF attack in Bad Homburg many years later, when members killed the Deutsche Bank CEO Alfred Herrhausen in a bomb attack on his vehicle in front of the Sinnenbad.
Meanwhile, the public movement is still in place peacefully, wanting to reform Germany from the inside.
Why do we remember the revolution even nowadays? Many values we take for granted nowadays have their origin in the '68 revolution. For example, our mindset in matters of raising children and sexuality, and in general, our widely spread open-mindedness. Many movements in our society, for example, the Atomkraft Nein Danke movement, and also political parties like the Green Party, can be seen as a continuation of the movement. A comparable movement in our time is Fridays for Future, where also young people aim at change and matters for a better future.
The 70s can be seen as a very strong example for German citizens raising their voice against overcome traditions, fighting for more modern democratic values and standing up against the period of the NS regime.